my Global Affairs Unfiltered streaming audience. Ah, shoot. I missed my cue. All right. So I should be broadcasting with the AM. There we go. So as soon as I finish, as soon as we finish this commercial at K Talk, I can start talking there as well. But anyway, for those of you who are tuning in through the stream, I've got some good info. You know, there's still more committee meetings that are going on today, and which is the thing that I am the most interested in as far as that's concerned. But as soon as you start jumping on the stream, then I will talk to you. But I need to cut off this radio transmission here really quick. So today is going to turn out to be a pretty interesting day, to say the least, as far as the Senate committees are concerned, because apparently all three of them still have appearances at different parts of the meeting of the morning. That's what happened. There we go. All right. All right, here we go. So, good morning to the K-Talk audience as well, AM 1640. You're listening to the Jack Stockwell Radio Talk Show program, and those of you who are on the stream, you are listening to Global Affairs Unfiltered, which I will be doing more and more of, less and less radio, more and more of the stream. It's so much easier, and I can present all kinds of information. Some of the information that I want to present today are phone numbers that are very important that you are able to tune into. Now, if you are just listening to the radio broadcast for the first time in a while, I want you to know that I am streaming the radio show at YouTube and at X, and the YouTube address is, you go to youtube.com/@Global Affairs Unfiltered. That's all one word, Global Affairs Unfiltered. And if you want to listen at X, sometimes that's a little more convenient. You go to x.com/Global Affairs UF. You don't spell out the whole word, just UF. And we're able to get more and more listeners to the stream all the time. So today is an extremely important day due to the fact that there are still committee meetings that are being held for all three of these three people that need to get in there, RFK, Patel, and Gabbard. So I've got some comments I want to make about that in today's program, especially with Bobby Jr. And just surprisingly, out of nowhere, just as he's about to sit down once again before Finance Committee or some committee today, his cousin, Caroline Kennedy Jr., suddenly starts a smear campaign. Just out of the blue, I guess. So I'm going to get to that. There's some other things I want to talk to about first, not the least of which is, and I am trusting the sound quality is okay. I'm going to text messages here, and I don't see anything coming in that would dissuade what I'm doing. So here we are. This what's going to come out of all these breaking developments? I mean, are they going to lead to solutions? Is it going to be just more of the same? I mean, if you look at the vote on Bobby Kennedy Jr., which apparently is going to be tomorrow, Wednesday, and then the Gabbard vote also tomorrow. Patel's not clear yet. Patel could end up into next week. But that will one way define one way or the other if these individuals are confirmed. Then one can hopefully expect a big clean out of what is generally referred to as the deep state, more efficiently called the permanent bureaucracy, but the one that's there doesn't really care who gets elected and who the administration is, because they go on doing their stuff all the time. And if it weren't for these three that have a possibility of getting in there, Gabbard, Patel, and Kennedy, it would definitely be business as usual. And with all of the hoopla that was involved with Donald Trump presidency, campaign, and now as president, 2 weeks now as president, and all the things he's done, would come of naught eventually, because he'd be still up against the deep state, which is what smothered and killed his first administration and made it kind of impossible to a large degree for him to have been able to have gotten anything done. So if these three people get in there, and all of the arm twisting and stuff that's going on behind the scenes, I wish we could have information on that to enlighten us as to what's going on. But that's the big decision. And those testimonies go on today. I have some phone numbers that I'm going to show you here shortly, those of you who are on the stream, that need to be called. I'll tell the radio audience what they are. There's certain people, all you got to do is call. You call their office. You're not going to talk to the representative or the senator, but you will talk to the staff. And if you don't talk to the staff and it goes to message, leave a verdant message. So today is Netanyahu's big day. He's already in the United States. Trump was meeting with Witkoff. Today he's going to be meeting with Netanyahu. Obviously a meeting which is expected with somewhat suspense, obviously by millions of Palestinians who have TVs or smartphones who will be tuning in, and by the whole populations, people throughout the Middle East and beyond, because the question is Netanyahu's policies going to continue to exist? Will Trump insist again on dislocating Palestinians to Egypt, Jordan, even Indonesia that he's talking about now, which has been rejected, of course, by all these governments? And even on top of a meeting of, I think it was 6 Arab nations, which happened a day or two ago, where they were saying that there's no solution to what is going on in Israel and Palestine except a 2-state solution for Palestine. And so is that going to be the plan which is revealed by Netanyahu's office? I mean, it came out of Netanyahu's office last May, which had this big, gigantic real estate buildup for Gaza Strip. I think one of the best ways to imagine what it is Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, and what Netanyahu and investors have in mind for Gaza is just look at Doha. Look at the modern cities in China, the modern cities in Indonesia, but Doha, in particular, the high-rise, the building condominiums, the skyscrapers, with no Palestinian population left to dirty the scene. I haven't seen any drawings, architectural renderings, but I heard a lot of talk and seen some headlines and some print that's what they want to do. They just want to turn it into a resort with, to some degree, golf courses. Of course, you're going to have water for that. And then exit the Palestinians, because they'll just be in the way. So what's going to, to get an inkling, I think, of what is going to happen today, is Trump going to prevail on his promises to end the wars? Is he going to bring a change to this situation or not? I mean, that's something which is going to have a tremendous influence on what we have to do as citizens here. And obviously, we're not the only ones, K-Talk audience, my streaming audience, that is somewhat in a state of suspense, especially that which was called by not an emergency, but a European Union meeting that just happened. They all got together, in which Starmer from Great Britain participated, and this is the first time a UK Prime Minister has attended an EU legislative meeting since Brexit. And our NATO Secretary Rudy is also there, and the topics, of course, were European security, countering Russia, and I'm sure, what are we going to do about Trump? And this is what the world is looking at. That's certainly going to be on the agenda. I think very promising was the testimony of Tulsi Gabbard last week. It could very well be that Trump has been working with the Senate, leaning on senators to approve her. Hopefully that's going to be sufficient, because that's the only reason why I can think this thing is being drawn out, is what are the wheeling and the dealing, the art of the deal, the things that are going on behind the scenes. What is Trump promising the more vocal critics of these three in these Senate hearings? What's he promising them behind the scenes? And this is how you get things done. I remember an interview I had, 20 years ago with Hatch, Senator Hatch at the time, and his buddying up to Ted Kennedy, and the fact that there was an awful lot of Kennedy's legislation he wanted passed that Hatch was supporting. And I just asked him, well, I knew the answer, but I wanted him to, openly admit it on the air. Why all this buddy-buddy stuff with the other side of the aisle? He said, well, that's the only way you get anything done. You got to compromise. In order to get Kennedy to agree with his, the food and safety legislation that he passed that was going to stop the sale of supplements, but he saved that. Thank you, Senator Hatch, for that. He said he didn't use the term wheeling and dealing, but he talked about compromise and the fact that you do the best you can without selling your soul to support stuff across the aisle in order to get their support for your legislation. And there were some things that Hatch was involved with I wasn't too happy about. I remember talking about it on the radio at the time. And stuff that I was, but it was that food safety thing. And the thing that allowed, the FDA wanted to be able to have the power to license supplements, and then of course would make it only available through medical prescription, and then of course there would be no medical prescription. Well, it's worse than that now, and this is why Bobby Kennedy is on the scene. Now, hopefully, what Trump is doing behind the scenes, twisting arms, promising supportive legislation, whatever, hopefully that'll be sufficient, but that is against what Ray McGovern had warned, that the FBI has enough blackmail material on many of these senators. All you got to do is blackmail them. You don't have to go wheel and deal. You don't have to twist an arm. You don't have to have the president suddenly show up in Senator Warren's office trying to get her support for RFK. But when the vote comes out tomorrow, it'll be interesting to see how this goes through. But Ray McGovern, interestingly enough, and if you've been listening to the Napolitano broadcast enough, and Ray McGovern, Larry Johnson, two of the best ones, Max Blumenthal, Colonel McGregor and Wilkerson, and I mean the list goes on and on. But McGovern always just says things like that, and he says, "Hey, the FBI has files on everybody. They probably have files on half of you listening at K-Talk this morning. Wouldn't you feel left out if you didn't know if you thought the FBI didn't have a file on you somewhere?" Well, anyway, hopefully it doesn't come to that, but there's other, I think that's the best I can say at the moment about that. Now, naturally, there are these other projects that are coming from Trump. One of the most problematic things is his effort to grab the Panama Canal. And again, the proposal for the annexation of Canada and Greenland. Also very unworkable is this idea of the tariffs, Canada and Mexico 25, China 10, And now all of a sudden, the art of the deal shows up, and Mexico and Canada agree to what Trump wants, and so he drops the tariffs. And so I've had discussions with friends and staff at the clinic about the virtues of tariffs and how they've been used in the past, and the argument for including the word tariff in our Constitution, that Congress has, or the president can do that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the standard argument is, well, it's just going to raise the price on everything. Well, maybe initially, but it wouldn't stay that way. However, it can also be used as a bargaining tool, and apparently that's what's happened. Now, what's going to happen with the Chinese 10%, I don't know. But when you look at, the first stop for Rubio was Panama, where President Molino capitulated. He agreed to dissolve the MOU with China, the Belt and Road Initiative earlier. Then its prescribed time to expire. But on the tariffs, I think that can only lead to disaster, because if you look at the amount of, I know I just backtracked on what I said, but for this point, if you look at the amount of things which the United States imports from Mexico, Mexico accounts for, and I've just recently discovered this in my research, 63% of the vegetables imported into the United States come from Mexico. 47% of fruits and nuts, 63% of the vegetables, 90% of frozen broccoli, and 90% of the avocados that are consumed in the U.S. And then concerning cars, it's over 42% of all the U.S. spare auto parts are imported the first 2 months of last year. By the time February had passed, 42% of all the spare auto parts had come in from Mexico. And nearly 4 million light auto vehicles for the U.S. are produced in Mexico last year, and that this will be for sure leading to an increase in prices, especially since Canada immediately were announcing their counter tariffs, which now they have dropped in the last 24 hours. Mexico said, well, we're going to give you tariffs on the agriculture and industrial goods. That's been dropped. So despite the fact that Trump had said this with this meaning of the golden age of America, I suppose it'll all be worth it. The price has to be paid, he said, but that remains to be seen. Now, there's all kinds of efforts to direct which direction. Where's this going? And one view comes from Patrick Lawrence, who's had some interesting things to say, who is generally considered a rather thoughtful analyst, coming from a certain opposition inside the United States. He has a rather, I would say, a rather pessimistic look by saying that no matter who is president, they're going to still remain under the influence of the deep state, because that's always been the aim of the deep state, which is global hegemony. And even though the president is exhibiting certain traits of isolationism, because of the power of the deep state, he is eventually going to have to bend to it and continue the American hegemony. That's if things don't change. Now, especially since the chaos which Biden left is just not to be underestimated. America is part and parcel a sponsor of genocide. Whether, your best friends or your religious friends or working friends, whatever, want to admit it, we are hand in hand with the genocide of Palestinians and a kind of an almost increasing genocide of Ukrainian soldiers who are being slaughtered at just horrible numbers just since the first of the year. Well, actually, it goes back into December. And now Trump's meeting with Netanyahu, and they got to talk about this racist brutality against the Palestinians by this terrorist group organization called Israel. He's pulled America, I'm talking about Biden, pulled America into this proxy war with Russia. Biden thinks that America, as is whispered into his ear, America is an empire. And it's a country which is always acting on the basis of that kind of ideology. And nations of that kind are not really in a position to change much, even though the administrative head might. And so he thinks that from Biden to Trump, there's not going to be a whole lot of change. There will be in content, maybe some change in style, but not much in content. Now, that's one view. Now, another view comes from another interesting analyst, Rainer Rupp, R-U-P-P, who's normally a rather hard-nosed analyst. But he thinks that Marco Rubio declared that it would not be normal that the world is a unipolar one. And this was a couple of comments from Rubio the other day that flat out surprised me, because I don't know that he used the word multipolar, but boy, that's what he was tending towards. Rubio said in an interview with Megyn Kelly at the, last week that where the United States was the power center of a unipolar world is a passing phenomenon. Now, how would you take that? So he's quite optimistic that this could really be the end of this Westphalian system, which was replaced by this unipolar world that could be reestablished. Well, that's speculation, obviously. You know, we can use that in this moment, just kind of waiting, but I would say that the thing I'm waiting for the hearings to continue and decisions tomorrow on these three, but also what's going to come out of Netanyahu's visit. And so what, it's 9:30 back east. I don't know that they finished breakfast yet, or I don't know if they're meeting yet, because, I mean, there's no point in defining the immediacy of the moment other than speculation until we find out what comes out of that meeting. But it's, you know, it's, the talk I was picking up on the news this morning is it's going to go in the direction of the Oslo Accords, because it's now at a moment where objectively there is a chance to put the Oslo Accords back on the table, unless it's completely made impossible by what happens with Trump and Netanyahu today. But the other major crisis spot this morning, of course, is the proxy war of the U.S. and NATO against Russia and the Ukraine. And there are some hopeful signs. There's a statement by some Russians that Washington has scheduled a meeting with representatives from Moscow, from Kyiv, and Trump said this. And this comes after Keith Kellogg had suggested that both Kyiv and Moscow should make concessions for a peace deal to be reached. I don't know that Russia's going to make any concessions. The only concession I think Russia or Putin would make is, we'll stop shooting for a while and see what happens. But they're not giving up any territory. I mean, if I have followed this correctly all the way through, they're not about to give up any territory whatsoever. So there's rumors that Zelensky, of course, who is no longer supported by Russia as representing Ukraine because his term ran out last May, and there have been no elections that should have taken place by now. However, the United States is pressuring the Ukraine to hold elections potentially by the end of this year, which would turn out to be rather interesting. But Reuters, which is an extremely unreliable source for news information, but nevertheless they quoted these two reliable Russian sources saying that Saudi Arabia and the Emirates would be pursued by Russia as a possible location for a summit between Trump and Putin. Because I was wondering about that. Putin is not going to come to oh, I'm sorry about that. Somebody was trying to call in. I should be watching this a little closer. Sorry about that. I'm afraid that's just going to happen to a certain degree, and I can't do a whole lot about that. I will try, but I'm not so sure that I can. Anyway, when I was thinking about the meetings between Trump and Putin, Putin's not going to come to Washington, and I don't think Trump is going to go to Moscow. So where are you going to do it? Well, traditional places in the past when these two nuclear nations would sit down and talk together, Helsinki, Geneva, Vienna, they're no longer in question because of the geopolitical situation that exists in these countries. But that Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates would be pursued for such an early meeting. But the other major sign in the positive direction is that Trump has apparently frozen all money from the United States to the Ukraine, and all these so-called independent civil groupings and so forth are just dried out for money, which is very good. And so there's this longer report from the Gray Zone, a source that you should check on a regular basis if you haven't already, discussing how all of the programs by USAID, the United States aid, have been canceled, including to Eastern Europe. I was watching on Fox this morning, listing all of the things of money through USAID. You know, it was created by President Kennedy back in the 1960s on an idea from Eisenhower, post-World War II concepts of using U.S. aid to help these places outside of the Marshall Plan. And what has happened with USAID since then is it's been the sponsor of terrorism and the most outrageous programs in some of these other countries that once they found out what was going on, they're shutting down USAID. It's been canceled. There's another several billions of dollars that were going on. I think it was Musk that announced that they've saved $1 billion already just by shutting down DEI. Just since DEI was shut down, they saved $1 billion. Now, when you're talking about trillions, $1 billion is hardly anything, just 1,000th of a trillion. And $1 million is just 1,000th of a billion. I mean, you get to numbers like that, you kind of lose reality, but still, it's shutting down the flow of cash to the Ukraine. And it's extremely important in that regard because Robert Fico, who's the Prime Minister of Slovakia, had just said this week that USAID and the Soros Foundation are pouring millions into his country, into Slovakia, to destabilize the government through the Maidan approach. And so that if there's that cut, if that money is cut, it's going to be really big, but it could have a big impact on Georgia and Hungary, because the color revolution's going on in Georgia again and in Hungary against against him. One of my heroes, and I can't think of his name offhand. When you cut off the money to these organizations, I mean, here you have the American people by mandate putting Trump into office to do the things that he promised to do, which he's doing day by day. But at the same time, we have money funded by tax dollars, covered by debt, trying to undermine countries that begin to exhibit a certain degree of individualism and breaking away from global control. Our tax dollars. So they just shut down USAID. Thank you, President Trump. And because of this adverse situation, the Serbian Prime Minister just resigned, which is very good. And just to stay on these topics with Trump here for a moment, renewing these calls for Canada to join the United States, saying that there would be tremendous benefits. If that were to happen, of course, the benefits would be fantastic on both sides. But the trade benefits, the military protection that Ottawa would get in return. Now, Canada isn't threatened by anybody. I don't know anybody waging war against Canada. And the United States right now isn't threatened by anybody. Because along with Canada, we are living on this gigantic island, which has no neighbors to speak of. I mean, there's no threat to the American continent, and that includes Canada. So when Trump starts talking about the military benefits for Ottawa, if they were to join with the United States, I don't know. Well, the other big topic, of course, is what just happened in Germany. Germany has completely imploded, exploded, detonated, whatever you want to call it. Just last week, you had a very turbulent development going on in the German parliament where Friedrich Merz, who's the likely to be the next chancellor, in some macho action pushed ahead and wanted to have a vote on a law that would limit the influx of refugees. Now, the AfD, alternate for Deutschland, the AfD party, which is kind of the Trumpers of Germany, I hope I can get away with that, have been pushing shutting down the border, Trump style. If you have been to any of European countries, as I have a few times over the last 2 decades, every time you go, especially in London, Paris, various cities in Germany, you notice, especially in Rome, a growing number of people who don't look British or French or German or Italian. I mean, a virtual flood. Now, when I was in Spain last year, I didn't see that. And I mentioned it to my son, whose wedding we went there to celebrate. I said, where's all the immigrants? And he said, there aren't any. I said, what do you mean there aren't any? He says, no, Spain has very tough, very strong borders. They don't allow all of these poor unfortunates fleeing from Africa who aren't just looking for a better life, they're looking for food. Spain has strong immigration laws, and they don't allow this. They're not going to allow what's happened to France and England and Germany to happen to Spain. And so one of the lines, one of the electoral lines or banners for the alternate for Deutschland party, which comes in second behind the CDU, the major party, is to stop the influx of refugees and to trump the borders, as what's happened to the southern border of the United States. And so the AfD is saying, well, you're just plagiarizing our legislation, because it's almost word for word the same thing. But in Germany, there's an absolute taboo, the absolute red line, that nobody in the democratic spectrum can have any collaboration with the AfD. You've got several, the Labor Party and the CDU and the even the BUSO now has been mentioned. And trying to think of the other one, Wegener's party, that may be it. Anyway, they all have this taboo in these various parties. You have nothing to do with the AfD. You have nothing to do with the German Trumpers. Well, that implies that, you know, as they are gaining more and more popularity, you know, I go, and this is not a comparison, but if you go back and you study the rise of the Third Reich and how many times the Nazi Party lost in the elections, just over and over again, till they finally won. Well, the AfD is having all of these problems, but they're gaining in popularity. They're about 20% now in the polls, and I think the CDU is 30%, 10%. That's enough. That's enough for the CDU to win. The point I want to make here is that the CDU being run by Merz wants the weaponization of Germany to return, wants Germany to become war ready. Pistorius, the defense minister, wants Germany war ready by 2029, I think, for a war with Russia. The AfD doesn't want anything to do with that, but they want to strengthen the borders and rebuild German productivity and engineering and manufacturing from the inside out, as to return to its leadership position in the role for those kinds of industries. So it's it's just interesting how you remember during the campaign a year ago here in our country, and when people found when the Democratic Party found Trump saying something that caught a lot of attention, in fact, his numbers would go up 2 or 3%, the Democrats started pushing it. And so this is kind of what's going on in Germany, and it's they have this saying over there of the where you jump as a tiger, but you end up as a carpet before the bed. And when I first heard that, what are you talking about? So I looked into that further, and what it means is sometimes, not necessarily through boasting, but through some outrageous bellicosity, you leap forward as a tiger to make your points, but it deflates so fast you end up as a carpet at the foot of the bed with a tiger head on it. I had to think about that for a second, but then I thought it was quite a great analogy. And so that's what they're saying about MERS now with his new immigration concepts. Now, why is this interesting to you or not? Is because if MERS gets in there, he wants to send Taurus missiles to the Ukraine. And the election is not that far away now. It's a matter of weeks. And he said that's one of the first things he would do is send Taurus missiles to the Ukraine. The slaughter that is going on against the Ukrainian soldiers now, I talked about it yesterday, over 50,000 dead in November, 50,000 dead, over 50,000 dead in January and December both. Over 150,000 dead in just the last 3 months. And when I heard Trump talking about how the Russian army is falling apart and they've got 1 million dead so far, when the truth is they have less than 100,000. That's bad enough. And that the war won't go on too much longer. And I kind of thought, oh my goodness, man, where are you coming from? And of course, we do that in the spectrum of how we view the world and what these things mean to us or don't mean to us. And then I listened to Alistair Crook on the Napolitano show yesterday, and he says, no. You got to understand, Trump is a showman. It's a three-ring circus, and it depends on who he's talking to at any particular time as to what he's going to say. You have to keep them laughing. You have to keep them entertained. You have to keep them enjoying the moment, while behind the scenes you're doing the things that you need to do as far as the art of the deal is concerned to bring your ends together and achieve your purposes. So he said, when you look at who he's talking to the military when he made those comments. And because there are people in the Pentagon who have this crazy idea the Ukrainians are winning. Even though the flow of intelligence several times a day coming out of this area, the Ukrainians are being slaughtered. So I just wanted to mention that, and I wanted to mention this German thing because this election is coming up here before long, and I wouldn't mind seeing the AFD get in there, but this situation, I want to finish up with this situation in Ukraine and the battlefield, is clearly coming to the end, and the reports, as I said, are more horrifying by the day, making clear that the Ukrainian population is just being slaughtered for no good reason other than the military-industrial complex and their geopolitical fantasies. And the latest, you've probably heard of this by now, the latest is that the Ukrainian military is now enlisting men who are diagnosed with schizophrenia. Talk about running out of soldiers. These are people who suffer paranoid schizophrenia and are deemed, well, usually if you're diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, it's usually you're permanently disabled. And the drugs that you would be taking, suffering from that, are disabling themselves. And these people are being sent to the Army without a whole lot of deliberation about it. As I've looked in the alternative press saying, no, what, are you out of your mind sending these people there? I mean, these are people who suffer from delusions, from hallucinations, who struggle with impulse control, and poor judgment, which leads to shooting civilians and fellow soldiers. And they're highly susceptible to these kinds of aberrant behaviors when they're in high-stress situations, resulting in the increased likelihood of suicide, which is one of the major side effects of schizophrenic medication, that under very stressful conditions that the medication is supposed to assist in treatment of, suicide follows, and sometimes they take out more than themselves. And these are people with these automatic weapons on the front line being chased down by these drones that go after the fighting men and women. If the bullets can't reach them, the drones do. And this gives you a sense of how desperate the situation in the Ukraine is now. And how much more desperate it's becoming. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention is Trump agreeing to this new UK ambassador, Mendelsohn. And this has got to be watched with great attention, given the role of this special relationship with the UK and the downfall of America. That's one thing. But very interesting is this article by Jeffrey Sachs, another regular on the Napolitano podcast, who is calling on the German government to support the negotiations in the Ukraine. He says the foreign minister Baerbock was always a war minister. She's not a diplomat. She's just right there with Pistorius, wanting to get Germany war ready. Sachs thinks that the war in the Ukraine will be ended rather soon, but that's not the only problem. He says if Merz becomes dominant, then the German economy will go the distance to China, and then Germany for 10 or more years or so are going to have massive difficulties because Germany would have to give up its supply chains to the east. So where would the growth come from? Well, it can't be accomplished with the U.S. market because Trump is already confronting Germany with massive tariffs that he's promised for Germany if they don't stop the war drive against Russia. And then Germany will be left without any exports. So Germany is not the best place to be living right now. And I think the fact that Putin said that it would be also quite important is something that Putin had just said about Germany. He says it's unfair to hold the people responsible for the sins of their ancestors, referring in particular to Germany, where he said Germany should not bear the blame for its Nazi past forever. And now historical memory is important to avoid repeating the same mistakes. But blaming a nation's past sins on the younger generation is very unfair. So I think that's quite important because, you know, Putin is fluent in German, spent a lot of time in Germany during the Soviet Union days, and has seemed to demonstrate a fondness for Germany at times. But they're looking at the pit of all of the things that could be the worst, the absolutely immoral behavior towards the actual genocide going on in the Middle East, and the German position on that, because Germany is behind it. So I think an interesting thing comes from a very prominent Ukrainian. I just ran across this in research. Muriev, who is living in China. And he gave a very long interview, which, I haven't been able to see much of it. But it gives a lot of insights as to why the Ukrainians are really one people and not really differentiated between the Russians and the Ukrainians, especially as I've represented it. But just to mention, he had these NASA satellite photos, which were released last December, showing the success of the new Nile Delta project in Egypt, transforming desert land into farmland. And one of these several projects in the different parts of Egypt was to aim almost 10,000 square miles of desert west of the Nile River into productive cropland. And it's apparently working very well from the photos. And now, why is that important? Because if Egypt can do this, they could do this in Palestine and that whole region at large. Now, I went to Egypt back, I think it was '08. I went there and with Mary and with Paul and his wife Margaret, and we took a trip to Egypt. And I remember being in a hot balloon ride. Paul was just simply too paranoid to get in a hot balloon. Remember, it was shortly after that they had some hot air balloon crashes. But you go up, I don't know, 200-300 feet, maybe 400 feet, and looking down. I remember facing south, and over to my right were the pyramids, and over to the left is Cairo. And looking straight down below us, the line between extremely beautiful, green, lush cropland that came from the border of the Nile River up to the end of the canal. And then from there over, absolutely nothing but sand and desert. Not even an occasional oasis palm tree type of thing. Just an absolute absence of life. And so when I get this image in my mind, when the Schiller Institute is talking about the oasis plan that LaRouche put together 30, 40 years ago to turn Palestine and Israel into a desert rose through the Israelis were already using desalination of Mediterranean water to provide fresh water, or at least clean, fresh water that's going into some of their canals. Most of their drinking water is coming out of the Golan Heights up to the north through pipelines, aqueducts, whatever else. But when I hear about the possibilities of peace, a two-state solution, you can't just sit down and have both sides sitting at a table with grinning smiles on their faces, signing these documents of ceasefire, truce, or the recognition of a two-state or whatever else, without a developmental plan to follow it. And you can't have a developmental plan for this area with peace to follow unless there's economic development. And you can't have economic development without water. And these are very fertile grounds. They're just dry. So when this fellow, this Ukrainian living in China, releasing all of these photographs of what areas of the Nile, or of Egypt west of the Nile, in these agriculturally developed areas involving thousands of acres, that are now being fed water through irrigation canals from the Nile River. I mean, how can you argue that? So I think these are some of the important developments. I want to get into, after the top of the hour, I'm going to put up on the stream a screenshot of phone numbers and senators that need to be called today. They need to be called today because the voting tomorrow on Kennedy and Patel and Gabbard take place. So I'll put that up right after the beginning of the show. So I don't know how many times I've talked about the Middle East getting the oasis plan to turn the Middle East into an oasis, because we now have photographs of probably more parceland in Egypt than they have in the Middle East. Well, I guess that's part of Egypt, but whatever. One of the most urgent questions of the time: what are you going to do to develop? What are you going to do once there's a two-state? Will there ever become a two-state? And of course, I suppose that's what Trump and Netanyahu's talking about. You notice the peace deal the ceasefire didn't start until Trump raised his sword in the air. And then all of a sudden, look how fast they responded. And then you look at the threat of tariffs against Canada and Mexico, look how fast they responded. I mean, yesterday the president, I can't think of her name at the moment, but the president of Mexico sent 10,000 Mexican soldiers to the border to stop the flow of fentanyl. And then Trump declares that the drug dealers, the cartels are terrorist agents, which, according to our doctrine of terrorist agents, we can actually start bombing them. I don't know how much Mexico is going to go with that. But, you know, there's just this great, great possibility that exists, not just to bring the deep state to an end, and not just to turn the Gaza into a desert rose instead of a bunch of condominiums trying to mimic Doha. I mean, if you can get a vivid image of these dynamic forces that are trying to force this situation either way. And so that's, we're kind of, I mean, even this week could be one of the most important weeks in our lives because of the Senate vote. Is the Senate going to bow down and continue to follow the wishes of the deep state while they sit in their high places and legislate concepts that further enslave the people they're supposed to be serving? Or is there a chance that they can finally break free? Now, Ray McGovern was talking about how the FBI has enough files on all of these people who are contrary to these 3 nominations. But do you really want to do that? Because the FBI is going to have files on the people on the other side of the aisle. And if Patel gets in there as director of the FBI, maybe that can be sorted out. Now, Netanyahu's been in Washington for 2 days, meeting with Witkoff yesterday, meeting with Trump today, and I'm quoting now from the Times of Israel. There's the Times of Israel, Jerusalem Post, and Haaretz that I look at on a regular basis. And this is what the Times says: the discussions on the Middle East with Israel and various and sundry other countries are progressing. Bibi Netanyahu's coming on Tuesday, and I think we have some very big meetings. Trump was quoted. Well, you know the president's vocabulary, bless his heart. Bigger than anybody's ever seen before. Well, Netanyahu is expected to meet with Trump later today. And I think that the Times of Israel is reporting 4 to 6 local time, which would be 2 to 4 in the afternoon here. And then there may be something that comes out this evening, because the meeting is going to include dinner, which is supposed to be around 7 p.m. tonight. And this is going to be, you know, broadcast live. And then the two are supposed to host a press conference and meet with some of the hostage families. And the ceasefire discussions in Washington are expected to cover concessions that Netanyahu has to accept in order to revive normalization efforts with Saudi Arabia that he wants. Saudi Arabia is sick and tired of the genocide. So Netanyahu is going to meet tomorrow with Defense Secretary Hegseth. I wonder what they're going to be talking about. Attacking Iran? Anyway, I shouldn't have said that. But obviously they're going to be talking about advancing negotiations for the second stage of the Gaza ceasefire and advancing talks between Israel and Hamas. Now, I had a conversation last night with a very dear friend who was shocked when I said Hamas has won the war. And he said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, what do you think?" "Well, the IDF beat them. That's why you're getting all of these hostages released. And they are moving their forces now up into Syria." I said, no. They're moving their forces into the West Bank because they got kicked out of Israel, out of Palestine. I said, what happened? What kind of images did you see coming from various news sources on the first day of the ceasefire? You had all these Hamas soldiers riding tanks, riding armored vehicles, stuff that was left and abandoned by the IDF because the IDF was getting brutalized. They had to leave the Gaza. They were losing badly. And he just kind of stared at me like he'd never heard of anything like that before. And I said, well, it's just part of the propaganda that, our most powerful ally in the Middle East. We don't need an ally in the Middle East because there's nothing in the Middle East that's any threat to us. I mean, how is Israel protecting the United States? I don't want to go in that direction. So, Trump talked twice yesterday with Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, with the result of a 30-day pause now in the tariffs. They didn't stop the tariffs. They just paused it for a month. And then Trudeau had already announced his retaliatory tariffs, primarily on American agricultural exports going into Canada. And the province of Ontario has announced some retaliatory steps against American companies' infrastructure contracts. But now they've decided to back off for 30 days and see what happens. The Chinese government is regarding this tariff announcement as the start of a trade bargaining session. And, what is the trade that would be affected by a tariff with China? Well, it's the whole, after having handled Biden's all-out war, financial war, and gaining ground in regard to the semiconductor and computer industries of China, not to mention fusion power, space exploration, scientific innovation, research and development, because China is way ahead of this stuff than we are, way ahead of anybody on the planet. But China would not sustain the kind of damage that Mexico and Canada would or will if these tariffs are returned. Because trade is now 37% of China's GDP, whereas it was 60% in the first decade of this century. It's half of that now. And moreover, China has diversified trade to other countries under tariffs and sanctions from the United States. So China's exports to America are down to just 15% of its total exports. Of all the stuff, you see all these great containers and these container ships coming from Beijing and wherever, Hong Kong, wherever in China, coming to the United States at Long Beach and Los Angeles and Oakland, unloading these huge containers. That's 15% of the exports from China. So this is what most middle and high income nations are going to have to face with tariff man Trump. But they're going to be trading around other countries rather than incur the tariffs, and they're just not going to be that much more involved with it anyway. I thought I might get into the USAID cuts, but in order to stop the color revolutions, but I think I might pass on that because there's some other things that I want to address. But I think maybe now's a good time to bring up these phone numbers because this is really important. Now, this is the first time that I have done this on this show, on the stream, to share a screen. I better make sure I share the right screen. There we go. The calls and the emails to the Senate. Here you see the priority senators. Susan Collins, Todd Young, Mike Rounds, Tom Tillis, Lindsey Graham, who have some issues with some of these people. You might have issues with Lindsey Graham. Here are their phone numbers. Others on the committee that are not on the committee but are relevant to the floor vote. Mitch McConnell, John Curtis from Utah, Lisa Murkowski, Jerry Moran out of Kansas. For those of you who are listening on the radio and are not looking at stream, and you could look at stream if you want to turn it on your computer or on your phone, and you go to facebook.com/@ Global Affairs Unfiltered. One word, at Global Affairs Unfiltered. At X, you'd go to x.com/globalaffairsuf, at Global Affairs UF, all one word. And then you can see what I'm showing here on the screen to those who are on the stream. And those who are on the stream, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. I appreciate your being a part of this. And so here, I'm going to give you phone numbers for if those of you who are listening on the phone who want to do something for America. Most of you do stuff all the time. Most of you are writing letters. You're either writing letters or you're posting texts or emails or phone calls. I'm going to give you the phone call to these important senators who are sitting on the committee, and then I'm going to give you the phone numbers to those who are on the floor who might be dragging their feet, who don't sit on the committee, that need to be influenced. Now, when you call these people, these offices, you may are able to get a staffer. Now you just tell them. John Curtis has to support these three people. He needs to vote in support of these people, and tell them you're from K-Talk Radio, because John Curtis knows who K-Talk Radio is. And he knows that K-Talk can be a thorn in his side or an aid to re-election. Now, he doesn't have to worry about it for 6 years. But that re-election time will come around. So if you have a piece of paper and something to write with, I'm going to give you these numbers. First, Susan Collins from Maine. Her number is 202-224-2563. This is Senator Collins from Maine. 202-224-2523. Todd Young, I'm surprised he's dragging his feet, from Indiana. It's usually pretty conservative. Todd Young from Indiana. His phone number, 202-224-5623. Todd Young, Indiana, 202-224-5623. Mike Rounds from South Dakota. His phone number, 202-224-5642. 202-224-5642. Tom Tillis from North Carolina, dragging his feet, 202-224-6342. This is Tom Tillis, North Carolina, 202-224-6342. And then the infamous Lindsey Graham, South Carolina, of course, 202-224-5972. 202-224-5972. These are people who are sitting on the committee who, dragging their feet or made comments during their time to speak to the appointees, candidates, Gabbard, Patel, and Kennedy, may have had body language or comments that they made that indicated they may not be as gung-ho as they need to be. Now, others that aren't on the committee but are relevant to the floor vote, our own John Curtis, his number, 202-224-5251, 202-224-5251. Then there's Mitch McConnell, who already voted against Hegseth. But his office, he's done. But still, pressure needs to be put into his office. McConnell, 202-224-2541. They all start, the area code's 202, and they all have the prefix of 224. So Mitch McConnell, 202-224-2541. Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, 202-224-6665. 202-224-6665. Lisa Murkowski. And then Jerry Moran from Kansas, the last one. Oh, no, I got one more. Jerry Moran from Kansas, 202-224-6521. 202-224-6521. And he's listed in Politico as undecided. And then on the Democratic side, it would be important to get calls to Ron Wyden from Oregon, Ron Wyden, W-Y-D-E-N, at 202-224-5244. He was the only Democrat in the Gabbard hearing who seemed sympathetic to an agenda of confronting the surveillance state. Now, always try to reach a staffer if the office prompt gives you that choice. If no one answers or the prompt doesn't give you the choice, then leave a message. What's the message? End the wars, stop the lies, and confirm Gabbard and Patel. You know, the staffers are basically keeping track of calls on a scratch pad. Yay or nay. I mean, they don't have, and right now with the vote coming up tomorrow and more of the hearing today, they don't really have the time to sit there and have a cutesy, nice, warm little discussion with you as to why the person they're working for feels this way or that. They don't need to hear that. All they need to hear is the push against their not sustaining these people. And let me tell you something. The first time I ever did that, I don't know why. It was back when I was still in Utah Valley attending school for my undergrad and working and supporting a family of 3 by then when I first started listening to K-Talk, accidentally, just found it accidentally. And Bob Salter was, I don't know if it was some water issue or tax issue or what, trying to get people to call, just state legislators. And the funniest thing, when I went to dial the number, I couldn't do it. And the next time I went to dial the number and I couldn't do it. And the next time I dialed the number and then hung up when I heard it ringing. So nervous. For what? They don't know who I am. They don't need to know who I am. They just need to hear me say yay or nay. So it finally went through, and I just, you know what? I can't even remember what the issue was. But it's not. It's how I felt after I stood up for what I believed. And you remember when they were starting tracks. And I had just started at K-Talk on the morning show there in '96. And there was that demonstration down at on 13th South. And Janalee Tobias was there, and several other people were there, and talk show host Jim Kirkwood was there, and nobody knew who I was. I only just gotten started. And there was a ladder, and they handed me a megaphone, electric megaphone, and get up on the ladder so everybody can see you, and talk about why we're against mass transportation. Oh, I don't know, I'm not normally confessorial like this, but I have to confess, I didn't know what I was talking about. I wasn't familiar enough with what was going on at the time, but I was representing K-Talk Radio and people were cheering and applauding, and I just looked out at them and I was thinking, boy, if they only knew. If they only knew. And to this day, I was just thinking about that. Of all the issues to protest, anyway, I'm saying these things because if you have any hesitancy in calling these numbers, it's how you feel after you took a moment to stand up for what you believe. And you just tell these people, end the wars, stop the lies, confirm Gabbard and Patel, or the end of the deep state. Don't say things like, hey, we know the FBI knows about you, and, no threats, and no threats whatsoever. Your call probably won't be counted. So that's Susan Collins, Todd Young, Mike Rounds, Tom Tillis, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, John Curtis, Lisa Murkowski, Jerry Moran, Ron Wyden are the numbers that I gave you. And if you will call them and you don't even have to spend 2 sentences. Confirm Gabbard and Patel. confirm Gabbard and Patel. All right. I think that's enough of that as far as that's concerned. Now, why am I thinking that you should be doing this? Well, it's very curious, the timing of Caroline Kennedy's denunciation of her cousin, RFK. You know, she chose to be silent during his presidential bid. She never really said much or had much to say at all when he was running for president. But now she feels compelled to speak out because he purportedly poses a threat to vaccines. And since President Trump announced his appointment of RFK Jr. to Health and Human Services Secretary, you notice all of the heavy artillery that's come out against him from the vaccine cartel. And as it lines up the order of battle, what is it going to do to start firing at Kennedy? So many figured that the cartel would pull the usual dirty trick, a la Justices Thomas and Kavanaugh, of finding some woman complaining of unwanted sexual advances. Or, you know, a lobster bake somewhere on Cape Cod, or was it Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard, whatever, on some balmy summer evening in the 70s, living the exclusive elitist life. But when it comes to the public, we're kind of burned out on sexual advances, and we're kind of burned out on some DUI that we paid off somewhere through a lawyer to get out of, whatever. But what kind of cannons are they going to fire at RFK to sink his ship? And the vaccine cartel would have to come up with a special accusation made by a special witness. And so it's no surprise by the news that came forth from Caroline Kennedy writing a very nasty letter to the senators on the Help Committee, urging them not to confirm her cousin to HHS secretary. So she touches on the timing of her denunciation, not during her cousin's presidential campaign, but only when he started to appear to pose a threat to vaccines. So this is what she wrote. Throughout the past year, people have asked for my thoughts about my cousin, Robert Kennedy Jr., and his presidential campaign. I did not comment, not only because I was serving in a government position as United States Ambassador to Australia, but because I have never wanted to speak publicly about my family members and their challenges. We are a close generation of 28 cousins who have been through a lot together. And we know how hard it's been, and we are always there for each other. But now that Bobby has been nominated by President Trump to be Secretary of Health and Human Services, a position that would put him in charge of the health of the American people, I feel an obligation to speak out. And then she mentions her cousin's alleged threat to vaccines 8 different times in her brief letter, each time implying that as Health and Human Services Secretary, he would make the executive decision to take away vaccines, you know, as opposed to what he's really saying, having a full and transparent review of their safety. He didn't say get rid of them. He said just let's look at the safety records. If they're safe, fine. If they're not safe, make them safe. That's all he said. And so, as she explained his purportedly misguided ideas about health were not her biggest worry. She said, of even greater concern to her are what the claims to be her cousin's personal qualities. So there in the enumeration of his personal qualities came the heavy artillery. And this took the form of a vivid assertion that was the main subject of conversation at the cocktail parties people were attending when this news came out. She said this: his basement, his garage, his dorm room were the centers of action where drugs were available, and he showed how he would put baby chickens and mice in the blender to feed his hawks. It was often a perverse scene of despair and violence. Now, you're going to have to stop and consider the implausibility of this assertion, which implies that Mr. Kennedy devoted considerable time and resources to raising and killing his own chicks and mice instead of simply buying dead and frozen ones for hawk food, which is in the marketplace. That he would go down in the basement and do this himself to living animals. When anybody that's, I know someone who raises snakes, and they can, to feed the snakes, they can buy frozen, aborted mice, fetal mice. I never knew such a thing was there, but it's there for those who raise lizards, especially snakes. You thaw them out and you hang it in front of their mouth and they gulp it and swallow it. So when I heard this, that he would put baby chickens and mice in a blender to feed his hawks, I mean, oh, that's ghastly. Who could ever do such a horrible thing as that? I don't believe it. I don't believe it for the simple economic idea that you can buy this stuff already done. And every year in the chicken egg industry, billions of day-old male chicks are called by macerators. You know what a macerator is? It's like your garbage disposal. And a tiny fraction of these are used for hawk and falcon food. The rest of it's in pet food. 1 day old male chicks, not female, male chicks, have no purpose in an egg-laying factory. So if Mrs. Kennedy is so concerned about these personal qualities, why didn't she pen an open letter to the New York Times and the Washington Post when her cousin announced his presidential bid? Because if he were to get the capital seat of the capital city of the capital country and become the next president of the United States, he's in a far more powerful position than just Secretary of Health and Human Services. And now that he is proposed, or his name has been proposed to be that secretary, now she comes out with these basement chicken and mice stories. Well, her letter has all the hallmarks of a vaccine industry cartel hit piece. Now, you have to remember and understand that Mrs. Kennedy herself is Ms. Kennedy, excuse me, is an agent of the vaccine cartel herself. As was reported in the New York Times, quote, she has been actively involved in promoting the HPV vaccine. She was instrumental in persuading Mr. Biden to expand his cancer moonshot initiative to the Indo-Pacific region. And of course, the HPV vaccine Gardasil was developed by Merck and Company to take care of cervical cancer and other female problems involving the reproductive organs, but mostly a viral infection that is 90% treated with doing nothing to it. 90% of it disappears. And the amount of horrible neurological damage from the side effects of the HPV vaccine is... I had a patient that I took care of, perfectly normal 13-year-old girl. Excuse me, I'm getting dry here. I forgot to get water. A 13-year-old teenager, just full of life, full of energy, and for some reason, her parent thought that was sold on the idea of an HPV vaccine to prevent a viral infection that's only spread through sexual contact. Excuse me. And then I saw the images of the brain scan when her life just almost came to a complete sudden halt and end. Holes in the brain, just holes in the brain tissue showed up. I worked on her for probably half a year, and her mother attributed that to her getting most of her life back, except she was still handicapped to a great degree and will be the rest of her life. But at least she could start talking and communicate, and with help, stand up and walk, which she couldn't do before we started working on her. And so while Caroline Kennedy is talking about how her cousin chops up little living mice and living chickens to feed his hawks, which I don't believe, because you can buy it in the marketplace, as I said. You don't need to do that. She's out there promoting one of the most dangerous vaccines that there is. And, to repeat myself one last time, she only came out and started talking about this stuff after he had a chance, or is proposed to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. She didn't say a word when he was running for the position of president. All right. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is, the farmers. The farmers who are doubling down on Kennedy to become Secretary of, the farmers want him in there. But before I do that, I want to talk about, first I want to talk about the heart sound recorder, what we're doing in the office. We worked on a lady yesterday who, 3 or 4 years older than myself. She's almost 80. And she came at the invitation of a friend and the friend is a patient we've been taking care of for some time. And she's been diagnosed with heart failure, coronary heart disease, terminal AFib, diabetes, and the list of drugs that she's taken is considerable. And she came in very, very confused because of all the confusing advice she's been given by her medical doctors and the hospital. And she doesn't know which way to turn. And she had some rather extensive notes that she's written that I was impressed with. And very concerned about her health, quite overweight. Just the typical metabolic syndrome patient. And so we did the heart scan. But we didn't just do the heart sound recorder. We talked nutrition. Either through some cancellations or some change in schedule, whatever, I had a half hour free. So I could talk to her for half an hour as to why the advice that she was being given was absolute nonsense. And there's nothing terminal. And the only reason you've been told that you're going to have permanent AFib, that she said that they told her would lead to an early death, is because they don't have a drug for it. Anything they don't have a drug for that you're suffering from could be, the rest of your life, and if it's involving the heart or cancer or the brain or something, would certainly be terminal. And so I finally got her attention. I said, that's absolute nonsense. I said, you can use drugs to force the body to do something it's not doing because it's starving to death. And then hopefully by using that drug, you can mitigate the symptoms to a certain point where you can at least get up and walk around and have, somewhat of a life. Or you can go to the cause of these problems. So I asked her, do you know what the cause of all these things, the coronary heart disease, the heart failure, the diabetes, your AFib, do you know what causes these things? And she kind of stared at me because you could see her running through her data banks, trying to come up with a reasonable answer. And I said malnutrition. That's all, just malnutrition. 90% of everything Americans are suffering from is malnutrition. They're getting too much of the bad stuff and not enough of the right stuff. That's it. I said your heart is falling apart because it's not getting key micronutrition that it needs for normal heart function. And so your heart is slowly dying. And so the medical people are right when they tell you you're not going to live very long because of this AFib problem you got. And then she's on Eliquis, an extremely dangerous drug, and several other things. And so we did a heart sound scan on her, and I showed her the results of the scan and how terribly weak her heart is and how the valves aren't working in sync with one another. So the heart sound recorder is a computer-based, low-risk general wellness monitor which uses the principles of auscultation, which is listening, to acquire and display and record and save your heart sounds. And it is absolutely a key to improving the nutritional efficiency of the heart because we can demonstrate changes in the heart scan. And I'm bringing this up now because there are people who are listening now who probably won't be listening to the health show tomorrow. And I'm going to talk about it again on the health show tomorrow because it's February. And Valentine's Day is a mere 10 days away. And we think about the heart in the sense of romance. But the heart is an awful lot more than the center of romance. Now, certain types of heart stress can be monitored simply by visualizing the rate and the rhythm and the tone of the heart cycle. The rate is how many beats per minute. The rhythm is, does this beat look like the one before and the one before, or is the characteristics of the beat changing from beat to beat? Showing a little strength, weak, 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 strength, weak, weak, weak. Extra sounds, third heartbeats, fourth heartbeats showing up when there should only be two. This thing picks this stuff up. And as the heart, the heart's reaction to certain stressors in our environment, chemical stressors, nutritional, emotional, can be observed by using this device. Now it's different from an EKG because an EKG is looking at the electrical signals that are created by the heart. And that's why they have different leads and different positions looking at the heart from different directions. And by the electrical signal generated in the heart, they can tell what various parts of the heart are doing in the sense of damage or some kind of infarct or something that's happened in the past. It doesn't look to the future. It only registers damage. Now, the response to monitoring the observations of rate, rhythm, and tone, and frequency and amplitude, the strength of the beat, are all characteristics of the heart's waveform. And so we can use comparison graphs to help determine the effectiveness of the things that we do to improve the quality of life. So as with any wellness device, any suggestions that we make, and I tell these people this, should be undertaken only with the guidance of a licensed physician or some other healthcare practitioner, me, with Trudy, who monitors the test. And these findings can be used to support, but certainly not done in place of, sound medical therapies and recommendations. And that I tell them, I'm not taking the place of your medications. She asked yesterday, as they all do, well, do I still keep taking my drugs? Yeah, you do. But as your heart begins to function better because you're now feeding it, you're going to question whether you need this. That's when you go back and get retested by your prescribing physician and see what they have to say, because they believe this stuff is terminal. They don't believe this can be improved. They can change blood tests through the use of drugs. They can change the function of the heart through the use of drugs, but eventually it gets to beating a horse that just doesn't want to get up and move anymore, and you're still sitting there beating it with drugs. On the other hand, what we use is food concentrates. And you can demonstrate in just a few minutes a change in the heart scan by a few supplements that you chew up and swallow that are directed to improve the function of the heart. They don't cure anything. They don't heal anything. They just feed a starving heart. It's that simple. So I wanted to promote this during the month of February. There's a nominal fee because I've got to pay the people who do the test. But I'm telling you, if you want to give somebody a Valentine's Day gift that means something other than See's candies, and I'm not going to say anything bad about See's candies, especially the nutty, chewy ones, that I try to limit my intake. I can't remember I had any, but I remember what they taste like. If you want to do something good, a meaningful gift for somebody, or just the suggestion, they need to call 801-523-1890. 801-523-1890 and make an appointment. It's about 30 minutes, and you don't disrobe. You don't have to do any of those things. If you have an underwire in your bra, you should wear a bra that doesn't have an underwire. And you don't have, as I said, you don't have to remove any clothing. And it's just an amplifier, an accelerometer is what it is, a little microphone that sits over top of the 4 valves. And it picks up the function of the valve in the sense of amplitude and strength and coordination with the other parts of the heart. And so that we can see the rate, we can see the rhythm, and we can see the tone. Tone being the strength of the muscle itself. In this lady yesterday, she had a 35, I think it was a 35% ejection fraction of her left ventricle in an echocardiogram, which simply means that 35% of the blood being pumped from her ventricle into the aorta, 65% of it wasn't making it. 35% was getting out. 65% was either back flushing up into the atrium, contributing to AFib. But the main cause of AFib is simply malnutrition. The major cause of bundle branch block is malnutrition. The same thing, it's the same thing that's the major cause of myocardial infarction. Yeah, there's clots. That's true, and you can get a stroke in the heart, you can get a thrombus. But again, it's dietary issues that lead to that. So it's a game changer for a lot of our patients because we get a chance to teach that, in the words of Dr. Lee, and I'm loosely quoting him, one of the greatest tragedies of mankind and healthcare in America is the substitution of drugs for nutritional therapies to address an otherwise starving organ. And why is it starving? You know, you got your pizzas and you got your fast foods and you got your shake and bakes and whatever kinds of stuff that we feed our bodies. Most of them are processed foods or foods that have gone through some limited processing, or they're loaded with glyphosates, or they're coming from demineralized soils, or whatever else. They just lack the micronutrition that various organs need. And no organ in the body suffers quicker from malnutrition than the heart. And conversely, no organ responds faster to improved nutrition than the heart, which we can chart and show on the heart scan from the heart sound recorder. It's right there in front of you. It's undeniable. Even if you don't know for sure what you're looking at, you can see the changes in the function of the heart. And since it's the #1 killer in America, and most of the people who die from heart disease, the only warning they had was that crushing feeling in the chest as they fell to the floor. So I had a very, very dear friend of mine, one of my mentors in upper cervical neurology, die last November, 2 days after I'd spent some time with him. Apparently fit, nice and thin, golfer, exerciser, and a doctor in Carefree, Arizona that does what I do, or did what I do. And one of my teachers that goes back 30, 35 years, even though he's 4 years younger than me. Dropped dead. And I had talked to him about, he thought he had heart issues earlier. I talked to him about it a little bit prior to that. And well, I'm coming. I'll come up there and get that scan. I'll come to your office and let you take a look at my heart. Well, not now. Not now I'm going to be looking at his heart. And I don't want to sound cold and cruel. I'm certainly not trying to do that. But it would make a great Valentine's Day gift. 801-523-1890. Takes about a half an hour. And it has to be scheduled. All right. I want to do this really quick here, this letter. This assault on our Bobby Kennedy. A patient asked me if only one of these three could get through, which one would it be? We're in trouble if all three don't get in there. That's what organ in your body could you do without? Well, most of them you can't do without. Which of these three, if only one of them could get confirmed, would it be? Well, the most likely one that's going to get confirmed is Patel. But Tulsi Gabbard's an absolute threat to the intelligence community that's feeding Trump bad intelligence and is behind the American hegemony. And then Kennedy, who wants to make America healthy again. And when you look at the health statistics, we don't have to worry about the atom bomb or the hydrogen bomb taking out mankind. So here's I want to go through this Kennedy Beacon really quick. Because, and this is from the American Thinker. I'm quoting out of the American Thinker. The assault on Robert F. Kennedy's confirmation for U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services reveals more about his accusers than the man. The fact that he is such an anathema to corrupt, entrenched interests and their legislative lackeys is evidence that President Trump has placed an able ally over the proper target. Most of the flack consists of histrionic crocodile tears about his positions on vaccine safety and abortions, shifting attention from the core Make America Healthy Again message about food safety. Well, the American farmers know better. A recent letter of support signed by over 130 farms across the nation displays an exuberant agreement that this cause should be a greater priority for the Senate Committee on Finance than Bobby's abortion views or his justifiable skepticism about vaccine safety. The farmer's letter is noteworthy for its diversity, not merely racial, but geographical, agricultural, and political, and it's signed by conventional and organic farmers, big farms, small farms, Southerners, Northerners, conservatives, and liberals. And while Caroline Kennedy disgraces herself with unhinged ad hominem rants that her cousin is a predator, and senators grandstand to see who can outdo the others in new lows of disinformation and slander, the farmers, on the other hand, are demonstrating unity. And it goes on and on here, and I don't have time to go through the whole thing. But more and more of this, it's at the Kennedy Beacon. You go to the kennedybeacon.substack.com and you can read it for yourself. And it's, you know, if they are not heeded now, there's just a, listen to America's farmers, united for healthier domestic food supplies. If they are not heeded now, there will be hell to pay. As prices rise, grocery store shelves are emptied, and the U.S. life expectancy continues to decline. Presumably, the corporate spin dietitians will announce, let them eat ultra-processed, plastic-wrapped, government-controlled cake. I just thought this was really good. And then it finishes with this last sentence. Elites never see the guillotine until the heads start to roll. So, again, this is why it's absolutely critical in these hearings that are going on today. And all three of them are before hearings today, and then the votes are tomorrow. And how much time? I've got about 15 minutes here. Looking at my notes here. One of the, I was looking at the questioner, one of the questioners for Kennedy in the Finance Committee. Says this, our first question has to do with this directly. The questioner is asking, there's a concerted effort underway to defeat these nominees in the cases of Patel and Gabbard. It's ironic because Dick Cheney and John Bolton are making common cause with Democratic Party neocons like Hillary Clinton to defeat them. Your organization is supporting Gabbard and Patel. What do you see these appointments so crucial, and why is the opposition against them so fierce? Excuse me. This isn't, this is a very pertinent, very obvious question. It goes back to when President Eisenhower left office, and he warned that the military-industrial complex could become a very serious problem for the United States. That's 1960. 65 years ago. 65 years ago. And it's obviously related to the question of President Trump's decision to release the files concerning the assassination covered up of the Kennedy assassinations, including John and Bobby and Martin Luther King. And so Kennedy Jr., who is still going to be questioned today, has basically said that he is convinced that what is going to come up out of these revelatory documents once they're released by the Archives Department is the role of the CIA in those assassinations. And you can see why they don't want him in there. This is opening up a Pandora's box. It's opening up who was behind Russiagate. And Trump has an account to clear up on that himself. But it's a real hornet's nest. This thing can be a real Pandora's box. There is some hope that Gabbard and Patel, who are not coming from the pedigree of the deep state, or if they did, there wouldn't be any hubbub about any of this, will act on the part of President Trump to start cleaning out this apparatus. Without that, well, let me put it this way. I honestly believe that without these three people getting in there, and yeah, they got some problems, but they don't come out of the woodwork that is hiding the people who've created the deep state apparatus. They come from a different river. And I'm afraid that if they don't get in there, the United States probably may have no hope of ever becoming a republic again and get off of this war policy, which the Biden administration was pursuing. So So I just hope that all of these people get confirmed. Kennedy was grilled quite a bit on his health policy. Maybe Kennedy could also be a voice in respect to this deep state apparatus, where he obviously has a vested interest because it's related to his family history. But I can only hope that these nominations go through. Now, what I would like to do is one more time, for those who are on the stream, take a look at, oh, I've got to bring it up. I want you to take a look at, oh, there it is right there. Now that I'm streaming, I can show you these screens. So, I think this is it. Yep. If you're just coming in on the stream, these are the calls and emails to the Senate that need to take place today as early as possible. I mean, it's already 11, it's almost lunchtime back east. These offices need to be called, especially John Curtis. I don't know why John Curtis is acting like he's dragging his feet, but Curtis has been in the House for several terms. He knows how the game's played. And I haven't had a chance to go through the websites that tell you who these donors are for these people and what kind of money they're getting from whom. I just remember the biggest example that I ever saw was when Orrin Hatch was running in the primary for his last term, that he got through the primary and got elected. And I remember the news, the printed news information that came out regarding his donors. And the top 10 donors to Orrin Hatch's re-election campaign do not do $1 of business inside the state of Utah. Now that's when it first really dawned on me, the idea of the donor class. The people that these representatives that we thought were representing us, and they may throw in a little piece of legislation here and there that benefits Utah's, trust lands or the school lands or whatever else, for the benefit of Utah. They're there to operate in behalf of their donors. And a lot of these people have a good portion of money that comes in from, I meant to bring that up to show you the top 10 members of the Senate from Big Pharma and the money they give. I mean, you remember what happened between Kennedy and Bernie Sanders when Kennedy called him out and said, you are the biggest receiver of Big Pharma money. And Bernie Sanders was pointing, no, you got that. Well, I looked it up. A little less than $2 million in his campaign from Big Pharma, the biggest receiver. So anyway, here are the priority senators. The five that are listed: Susan Collins, Todd Young, Mike Rounds, Tom Tillis, and Lindsey Graham, are on the committee. And the others that aren't on the committee, but they're on the floor, and we know that they're Republicans that might be dragging their feet: Mitch McConnell, our own John Curtis, Lisa Murkowski, and Jerry Moran. And then on the Democratic side, Ron Wyden made a very sympathetic comment to Tulsi Gabbard about confronting the surveillance state. So I thought that was pertinent. So I can stop the screen save. I'll get better at this, and then I'll have videos that I want to play as well, excerpts from what other people are saying, so you don't have to hear it from me. You can hear it from the mouth, the horse's mouth. All right, now, with a few minutes left, I just want to once again mention the heart sound recorder and how vital it is when it comes to seeing the heart in real-time action. So I asked that lady yesterday that I was referring to here a few minutes ago, what kind of nutritional advice did you get? And they told her a few things. But they had mentioned the Mediterranean diet, which is a good place to start. And then I added to that. And I said, I don't suppose they told you that these symptoms are the result of starvation. And that's a kind of a Socratic type of question. Let that lead to further questions, and let's get the discussion going. What the world do I mean by starvation? Well, you're starving. You don't look like you're starving, but you're starving in the vital micronutrition that your body needs for these various organs to operate properly. And your heart, if it doesn't have the proper assortment of vitamins and minerals that come from food, mind you, not from a laboratory. And that was another thing. Well, these things, the doctors prescribe this stuff. I wasn't going to say this because I don't want it to go on record, but maybe I should say it anyway. Who stands as the vanguard of the number one killer? I asked her, what's the number one killer in America? She knew, heart disease. I said, what's number two? Cancer. I said, what's number three? According to the New England Journal of Medicine, what's the number three killer in America? Yeah, medicine. Improperly prescribed drugs, properly prescribed but improperly used, surgeries, medical instruments, hospitals, all added into one. It was the third largest cause of death. Bad diagnoses, misdiagnoses, it's several things, all added into one. And she was surprised to hear that. And then I said, well, who stands as the vanguards of the number one disease in America? Who stands there at the gates of heart disease? And I knew you could see her try to figure out an answer because she'd never been asked a question like that or had considered it. And I do that on purpose to set the stage so that I can say, cardiology. Cardiology is standing there at the gates of the number one killer in America. Why would you listen to anything they have to say? Well, they save lives. Yeah, they do. There's a lot of people with a heart attack that goes into the emergency room that their life is saved because of the great technology that we have to interdict these kinds of problems if you get to the ER fast enough. But it's not the drugs, it's the emergency care that was administered through certain drugs, perhaps surgery, perhaps catheterization to the heart, valve replacement, stents, balloon, whatever, things that can be done at the last second. And if the heart attack wasn't bad enough to rob the organs of oxygen, let alone the brain, sometimes you can walk out after a day or two of observation. But what do they tell you to do about it afterwards? They tell you to make up the missed ingredients and nutrition in your diet that led to those weaknesses in the heart? Or do they just tell you, here, you're going to be on these 6 drugs here, you're going to be on them for life? Calcium channel blockers, adrenergic blockers, diuretics, and the rest of them. And you're going to be on them for life. Now, just think about that. Is there no alternative? Is there no other way around this? Yeah. Start feeding the heart the micronutrition it needs so it can operate properly, the way it did when you were a child. But over the decades that followed of not giving your heart what it needs, it started to fall apart. Oh, that's age. No, it isn't age. It isn't age at all. It's whether or not you're fed properly. And your brain, your kidneys, your liver need to be fed the foods that Mother Nature intended for them to be fed in order for you to live abundantly, which is why when you look at a lot of these isolated indigenous groups around the planet that are separated from grocery stores, they don't have arthritis, and they don't have heart disease, and they don't have cancer, and they don't have diabetes because they eat from the earth daily. Well, you can't do that here. Well, it's not easy. I know that. I know that this is a difficult thing to do. However, we're coming up here towards the end. Tomorrow is going to be a health show. I might get into a little bit more of that tomorrow. But the heart sound recorder is going on now, and it It takes about a half an hour. You don't have to undress or anything like that, but you have to make an appointment. 801-523-1890. A great gift to give somebody that you want to see go on living without the prospects of heart disease. So I am going to bring all of this to an end. I'm going to shut down the stream only to